Welcome, everyone, to the first of this year's Sapientia et Doctrina lectures celebrating Fordham's Dodransbicentennial, a word that you have just learned, I think. It means that we are celebrating our 175th anniversary as an institution. My name is Jim McCartan, the director of the Fordham Center on Religion and Culture. And I'm very happy that we've attracted such a terrific audience here in Flom Auditorium, but also out there, people who are joining us through live streaming. Today's event is, as I said, one in a series of Sapientia et Doctrina lectures. That is to say, programs that will take place throughout the year and that will raise up Fordham's 175-year-old tradition of cultivating wisdom, Sapientia, and learning, Doctrina. And we thought, what better way to begin a year of celebration and a year of contemplating our future as the model urban Jesuit university of the 21st century. What better way to begin, we thought, than to survey the diverse and ever fruitful ways that the university and the city have been and remain intimately connected. Fordham is and always has been in and of New York. And conversely, New York is and has been in myriad ways embodied in Fordham University. And so today we've enlisted the help of a crew of notable alumni to better appreciate the depth and the richness of this mutually fruitful relationship. And as our program progresses, we'll also spend some time envisioning where Fordham's past meets its horizons and its future. Before handing things over to these alums, however, a few notes of housekeeping. As always, I want to encourage you heartily to turn off your electronic devices before we go any further. And especially people on the panel. Yeah. For those here in Flom Auditorium, you're entitled to a giveaway today, I will have you know. As you leave, you will get a copy of Msgr. Shelley's terrific new history. You'll get a copy of Msgr. Shelley's terrific new history of Fordham, which was just recently published by Fordham University Press. I hesitate to disappoint you, but only one copy per customer. Thanks. Immediately after today's program, you are also cordially invited to attend a celebratory Dodransbicentennial reception upstairs in the atrium of the library, just one floor up. So please don't, after you grab your book, grab some food and drink and celebrate with us and pronounce the word. And wish one another happy Dodransbicentennial. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our expert moderator. Our expert moderator, Haeda Mihaltses. She is a two-time Fordham graduate. Fordham College at Rose Hill in 1986, the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences in 1993. Mihaltses currently oversees external relations for an organization called the New York Mets. Please hold your applause or boos. And she is, as our program indicates, at heart a public servant, a veteran of New York City government. But you should also know that she is among the proudest and most enthusiastic alums that her alma mater could ever have or want. And so it is particularly a great pleasure for me to hand things over to Haeda Mihaltses.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone. Expert moderator, I don't know. This is my first time moderating. I'm usually on a panel, and I always say yes to being on a panel. But when I read the email that Jim sent me in May, I'm like, moderator. But I'll figure it out. So before, I just want to say thank you. It's very humbling to be here and to be on stage with such great panelists. As Jim said, Fordham has a very special place in my heart. as does the city of New York. I spent 27 years in government, the last 12 years helping Mayor Mike govern this wonderful city, and I've seen it change all for the better. I was a Fordham student in the 80s when it was pretty tough around here, but it was an absolutely wonderful experience. I met my husband here, met lifelong friends here, and I truly believe that if it wasn't for Fordham and the education and the values that it instilled in me, I wouldn't be where I am today. So enough about me. We're going to get started, and you have to bear with me. So first, welcome everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
I have an opening question, and it's going to be to Msgr. Shelley, since you wrote the book, so you get to speak first.
Thank you.
So, 175 years of history is far too much for us to cover in the course of an afternoon. So by way of opening up a conversation amongst the panelists and introducing our theme, what Fordham has meant for New York and what New York has meant for Fordham, let me ask you, Msgr, to tell us as briefly as you can a story that answers the question, how did Fordham become the Jesuit University of New York?
Thank you. First of all, may I ask if you can hear me? Yes. The reason I ask is I see so many smiling faces. When that happens at Mass on Sunday, it's usually because they can't hear me. Thank you again, Haeda, for your very gracious introduction. I also would like to extend a special thanks to Father Ray Schroth for his presence here today. I could not have written this history if he had not written an earlier history of Fordham some years ago. Ray, thank you so much for being here today. I'm honored and grateful to have this opportunity to give you to offer an overview of Fordham's history. And I've gotten the hint that I'm supposed to be brief. What I'd like to do, although not so brief that I appear to be roller skating through an art gallery, I'd like to mention three aspects of Fordham's history: its origins, its evolution, and then some questions about Fordham's future. I always like, and I say I will be brief, I always like the advice I heard about preaching. This person said, when you preach, stand up so people can see you. Speak up so people can hear you. And then shut up so people can love you. I'll try to follow that advice today. Before I begin, however, at the risk of embarrassing this gentleman sitting next to me, I want to call your attention to the presence here today of Dr. Joseph Cammarosano. He has been associated with Fordham for 75 years.
Wow. I missed the first 100.
He arrived here 75 years ago as a college freshman. For the last 60 years, he's been a member of the faculty, and during one of the most difficult periods in Fordham's history, he was the executive vice president. Father Finley told the Jesuit general, Fordham would not be here today without Dr. Cammarosano. No one alive today has witnessed more of Fordham's history. Few people have done more to shape it. So again, may I ask you to join me in thanking
Father.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father. You're much too kind. He was paid to say that.
As you know, our founding father was Archbishop John Hughes, and he established St. John's College, the future Fordham University, here at Rose Hill in 1841. His private secretary, John Hazard, said that the object above all others he had nearest his heart was education. And it's easy to see why that was his first priority. He himself was an immigrant with very limited education, and he realized the key for immigrants to climb out of this cycle of poverty was to provide them with the opportunity for education. When Hughes bought this property at Rose Hill, he said, "I did not have a penny wherewith to pay for it." He was able to raise only $10,000 in the parishes in New York City. Then he went to Europe on a 10-month trip and raised the other $30,000 that he needed, especially in Austria and in France. That's where the money came from. The school opened with a combined student body of 6 students. And I say, Hughes wanted St. John's College to be a place where poor immigrants could send their sons to get a college education. Unfortunately, initially it didn't work out that way. Fordham began as a rather expensive residential school. The tuition was $200 a year, which was well beyond the means of most immigrant Catholics in New York City. What saved Fordham during those early years was that it was popular with wealthy Catholics in many other parts of the country, from as far away as the Carolinas, Louisiana, Cuba, Mexico. We even had students from the French West Indies. As late as 1862, only 49.9% of the students came from the New York metropolitan area. That was not what Hughes wanted, and he was not happy with that development. And so in 1847, he asked the Society of Jesus to establish a second Jesuit college in New York City, a college that came to be called the College of St. Francis Xavier on West 16th Street, where Xavier High School is located today. For the next 65 years, that college, the College of St. Francis Xavier, not St. John's Fordham, was the Jesuit college in New York City. The tuition was $65 a year. You couldn't get out of the bookstore today for that price. But for 65 years, that school turned out the Catholic elite of New York, a whole generation of Catholic businessmen, lawyers, doctors, priests, and it served the Catholic community very, very well. Let me fast forward to 1907. That is the year when Fordham officially became Fordham University instead of St. John's College. 2 years earlier, the first 2 graduate schools were founded. The medical school, which was not a success. It lasted only 16 years. However, the law school was founded the same year, and from the very beginning, it was a great success. Incidentally, except for a few months in 1905, the law school was always located in Manhattan, for a reason that would have pleased John Hughes very much. It enabled Catholics of moderate means to hold down a job and go to school, law school at night, which was the kind of institution that Hughes had wanted originally. As you know, this year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of 3 of our graduate schools: the School of Social Service, the School of Education, and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Let me say just very briefly something about their contribution to the local community, and not just the Catholic community. For many years, the School of Social Sciences, the School of Social Service, I should say, worked closely with the Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York, which was one of the largest social service agencies in the United States. They worked together to relieve poverty in New York City, a city that was often described in the early 20th century as the largest poor city in the United States. The School of Education also made a tremendous contribution to the local community, especially by improving the quality of the teaching in the Catholic schools in the Diocese of Brooklyn and the Archdiocese of New York, by providing professional training for the brothers and sisters who taught in those schools. Incidentally, by the 1960s, those schools in those 2 dioceses had a combined enrollment of almost 500,000 students. By one estimate at that time, there were only 2 public school districts in the country that had a larger student body than that. In the early years, too, the School of Education made a major contribution to public education in New York City. At that time, many public school teachers were graduates of the charmingly called state normal schools. In prize, I wonder whether they're state abnormal schools. The graduates of those schools were ineligible for promotion to principal or assistant principal because they didn't have the required AB degree. Courses in Fordham School of Education were deliberately designed to remedy that deficiency in their education. In the 1960s, the president of Fordham at that time, Father Leo McLaughlin, established a new relationship between Fordham School of Education and public education in New York City. Leo McLaughlin had a great sense of social service, and he was alarmed at the complaints among many minority groups in New York City that public education was not serving them or their children well. And so he asked the dean of the School of Education, Dr. Harry Livlin, to prepare Black and Hispanic students to become principals in urban schools. Some of the first African American and Hispanic public school principals in New York City were graduates of our School of Education. The third of the graduate schools we celebrate this year is the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, which began as simply the Graduate School. Unfortunately, in the 1920s, it deteriorated into a diploma mill. However, in the 1930s, Father Robert Gannon, one of the most capable of Fordham's presidents, moved the graduate school from Manhattan to the Bronx, gave it a new name, increased the library budget, and attracted some very talented faculty members, many of them refugees from Nazi Germany, including Dr. Victor Hess, professor of physics, who remains our only Nobel laureate. Fordham's Business School began in 1920 as an undergraduate school with the modest name of School of Accounting. A graduate school was added in 1969, but in 1986, the dean of the school said candidly, quote, "Nobody maintains that Fordham is in the first rank of business schools." That was an honest but not very enthusiastic endorsement by the dean of the school. The second coming, so to speak, of the business school took place only recently, 2012, with the establishment of the Gabelli School of Business, which, as you know, was made possible by the donation by Mario Gabelli, a Fordham alumnus, of $25 million, which remains the single largest gift in the history of Fordham University. Fordham's sixth and most recent graduate school is the Graduate School of Religion and Religious Education, which was founded only in 1975. It was a pioneer in fostering new methodologies in religious education, and it quickly established an international reputation. I cannot land this plane without mentioning something about Fordham College, which was always at the heart of the Jesuit vision for Fordham. Believe it or not, in 1907, the enrollment at Fordham College consisted of 105 students. 105 students, and the faculty consisted of 12 Jesuits, 10 priests, 2 scholastics. 5 years later, in 1912, the College of St. Francis Xavier was closed, and was merged with Fordham College at Rose Hill. The enrollment at Fordham College immediately tripled. That was the positive side of the merger. The downside was this, that Fordham College then became an overwhelmingly commuter college, and remained so for the following 60 years. In 1949, 93.4% of the population of Fordham College came from 5 northeastern states. In the early 1970s, approximately 85% of the student body still came from the New York metropolitan area. No American college could aspire to a national reputation with such a narrow demographic base in its student body. At Fordham College, the major shift from a predominantly commuter college to a predominantly residential college began during the administration of Father James Finley, 1972 to 1983, and it accelerated during the administration of Father Joseph O'Hare between 1984 and 2003. During those last 19 years, Father O'Hare reversed the proportion of residential and commuter students. In 1972, 70% of the undergraduates were still commuters. By 1992, 70% of Fordham undergraduates lived on campus. If I may borrow a phrase from Scripture, there are many more things I have to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. However, if you are still interested after this presentation, there's a book published recently by Fordham University Press where you can get more information. With regard to Fordham's future, in the light of what I have just mentioned, it seems to me, and perhaps also to you, there are at least two challenges and opportunities we might want to consider. The first is this: how does Fordham realize its ambition to attain national prominence while remaining faithful to the desire of our founding father that Fordham should serve the needs of the local community, especially the economically and socially disadvantaged members of that community? I think that has a special relevance today when we realize Rose Hill is located in the poorest borough in New York City, the poorest county in New York State, and I believe the poorest congressional district in the United States. The second challenge is more complicated. Fordham today happily takes pride in welcoming to our faculty and to our student body people of many faiths and none. And we are very pleased and very grateful that this diversity has enriched this institution in many ways. However, the popularity of Jesuit education for the past 4 centuries has been due in large measure to one factor: the fact that it's rooted in the Christian humanism of the Renaissance and the positive aspects of the Catholic Reformation. Is it possible, I wonder, to find a way today to present this distinctive Jesuit form of higher education in an attractive and appealing manner to an increasingly diverse academic community? I don't have the answers to either of those two questions. Quite frankly, I don't think anyone does. But perhaps those two questions might serve as a basis for a fruitful dialogue, both among and between our faculty and our students, about the future of Fordham. Cardinal Newman once said that his model of a Catholic education was, quote, a place where truth was wrought out by many minds working together freely. I'm sure this is our own vision of Fordham. How we achieve it is up to us. Thank you for listening and for your patience.
Thank you very much, Monsignor. And I wanted to add, when Jim asked me, he said, would you read a book? I said, sure, send me the book. So when I got the book, I put down Gone Girl, because that's what I was reading over the summer. And first I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, this is a long book. But I got through with it very quickly. It was actually it was a good read and a very interesting read. So
Thank you.
I'm plugging the book. It's really a good book to read. So thank you, Monsignor. So second question that I think Pat and Joe can answer, public service. Patricia, we'll get to you later. So the subject now is the Fordham difference in New York. So Father McShane often calls Fordham the Jesuit university, the capital of the world. I'm biased, but I happen to agree with him. New York is the very definition a world-class city in terms of its economic importance, its ethnic and racial diversity, its leadership and cultural, its intellectual life, sports, and media. So the question I have is, where has Fordham made a distinct difference in terms of commerce or culture or politics or whatever else within the city of New York? And what is it that wouldn't be the same if Fordham hadn't been around?
How much time do I have?
As much as you like.
Let me first say that Fordham is one of the top brands in the Bronx,
You're right.
followed, not necessarily in this order, by the zoo, the Botanical Gardens, and the Yankees. I'm sorry, Marta.
okay.
You've got the Mets to worry about in Queens. actually, Fordham and New York City have a great deal in common. Now we'll start with land. We had a land swap on a couple of occasions. Back in the 1800s, Fordham made available 28 acres to the Botanical Gardens. I wish we had those acres now because, Father McShane, we need more room. Then we had another swap after the Fordham Hospital closed down. This goes back in the 70s, early 80s, I guess. And a nice story about that. Brother Jim Kennedy was then the financial vice president. And those buildings were up, and nothing was being done. I said, Jim, when are we going to, put in a bid for that property? Joe, let them knock the building down first. It'll be cheaper after that. That was the idea. And of course, we had Father Keating, who was of the same mindset, who was able to squirrel enough money away to build Keating Hall. That would not have been possible had it not been for his stewardship. And so we've had a long history of good money tenders in the university. But let me continue a little bit in terms of another land swap that we had, actually about 60 years ago at Lincoln Center. It was a small parcel. I think we're about $2 or $3 million for it, right, Monsignor? Lincoln Center, 7.5 acres. Yeah. Now, you would think that we got the better end of that deal. Don't think that was the case, because we've put up a number of magnificent buildings on that parcel. We have added to the skyline of Lincoln Center, and so therefore there was a quid pro quo. Yes, we got 7.5 acres. We paid $2 million, but look what we've given back. We have completed the footprint for Lincoln Center, and more recently, thanks to Father McShane. You see that beautiful edifice that we have for the law school and a new dormitory for our students. So again, it's not all been one-sided. We've been equal partners in this relationship. Now, if you want me to go on, I can talk about the economics of it. You want me to talk about economics? Okay. So long as it's not English literature or philosophy, I'm safe. Okay. Now, first of all, let me say that Fordham's primary mission has been the education of thousands of students. That's been our main contribution to the city of New York. They've come from all 5 boroughs. And so apart from that, though, Fordham made other contributions in the economic. For example, we are a large buyer of goods and services in the city of New York. In addition to that, our students and other personnel add to the demand. All you have to do is go to Arthur Avenue, and you'll see that many of those establishments are able to exist because of the students and not the faculty. The faculty can't afford to go there, but others. Okay. Hold the applause. And by the way, don't laugh. You guys are going to get a quiz over the internet on Monsignor Shelley's book, so maybe some of you better leave it here before you go out. But in any event, I want to talk a little bit about Fordham's contribution to the labor force. Monsignor mentioned all the different schools that we have here. I'll start with the law school. We provided lawyers to the legal establishment. In our graduate school of education, we provided professors and teachers. In our school of education, we have provided teachers of the public school system. In Gabelli School, we provided accountants and business people for the business community. And of course, I would say this, New York has been a partner too, because while we may have supplied the talent, we would need the jobs for people to go to, and therefore it's been a two-way street. We've created the supply, and in economics, Henry, New York City supplied the demand, and so therefore, again, a nice even exchange. So we've had any number of exchanges with the city, all very positive. But I have to add this. I don't want you to feel that this conversation is all one-sided. The city of New York has also made contributions to Fordham. I've already mentioned the property at Lincoln Center, but beyond that, we are able to enjoy the public services provided by the city. And I'm not talking about local police and fire. I talk about transportation, Mr. Foye, of which you know something. The executive director of, come on, you saw the little blurb there? Okay. How? Well, going back to Monsignor's book, he pointed out that St. Francis Xavier had a comparative advantage over Fordham in terms of enrollment. Now you might ask why. Was St. Francis that much a better school than Fordham? No, that wasn't the reason. They had local transportation. Fordham was up here in the boonies, and the poor people couldn't afford the cost of coming up here. But fortunately, starting at the turn of the century, the elevator, none of you know that the Third Avenue elevated, used to start down at the Bowery, and it came up to the Botanical Garden. As a result, it was possible for us to draw a large commuter population. So for the longest time, even as I was a student, most of our students were commuters. That would not have been possible had it not been for the elevated, okay? And so that was very, very important. And I would say this, you know, we hear of our model, we have a wonderful logo here. New York City is my campus, Fordham is my college. Fordham, without that campus, would not be Fordham. Make no mistake about it. And I would add one other point. You've heard Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. That's got a nice ring. But again, Fordham could have been located anywhere else. But if we're not located in the city of New York, it would not be the Jesuit, the Jesuit University of the city of New York. So it's been a wonderful relationship that we've had, Maud, and I would hope that this will continue. Fordham's been a good citizen. And I would add one other point, though, that I want Henry to remember by. I've mentioned a number of contributions, but before I leave, I have to give this little talk about externalities. In addition to all of the benefits that Fordham has supplied over the years, Fordham has been responsible for a number of byproducts, a number of, we call externalities in economics, unintended consequences. It's like a homeowner maintaining a residence, and that maintenance of that residence adds value to all of the other homes in the area. Fordham has done the same thing. You say, how? Well, by training the kinds of people that we have, providing the education, the moral background that we've provided, the CUDA personalities. Our graduates have gone out into their communities. They've been involved in politics. They've been involved in civic activities, social activities, yes, even managing a little league team. All of these are externalities, unintended consequences, but a great boon to the society in which these people live. So Fordham has done its job across the board. Can you quantify all of these values? No, you can't, but they're real. And I'll leave it at that.
Pat, you want to add anything?
Sure. Well, first, it's great to be here. The campus looks great. I was late because there was more traffic on Fordham Road than there was on Broadway downtown, and I'm not kidding. I'll talk briefly about the future. I'm incredibly optimistic about Fordham for the following reason. If you look at the most important, impactful social demographic trend over the last 100 years, and it's likely to continue, it's urbanization. And populations across the United States and across the world are moving to urban centers. There's no reason to think that's going to change. I think that's an incredibly important trend for Fordham, which it's great for New York City. Fordham will benefit. I believe in Fordham exceptionalism. So let me talk about a couple of things. Just Srina consciousness. I took an honors program seminar with Father Schroth a long time ago, who took us to the New York Times building. And we saw typesetters represented by John Furyk, the one-time dean of the law school. We're in the Flom Auditorium today. The two or three greatest influences on me are my parents, Fordham, and I'm not very good at anything, so I've done lots of things. I was an M&A partner at Skadden Arps a long time ago, and worked with Joe when I was a young lawyer, and the firm was small. It was an incredible experience. But Father Schroth took us to the New York Times, where we saw typesetters and people working at computers and kind of in air-conditioned rooms, and the attention was terrific. Dr. Cammarosano talked about Fordham real estate deals, and I want to talk about two of them briefly, in part because they involve the rarest of personalities, which is a humble Jesuit university president. And I'm going to talk about...
We love.
Father McShane, this is historical. So the $40,000 purchase of the land here from the Archdiocese, and I recognize that Monsignor Shelley is a priest of the Archdiocese, so I'm going to try hard not to offend. But Fordham, as I understand it, first declined the offer. Then the Archdiocese came back the next year. The land was purchased for $40,000. I took the trouble over the last couple of days to go to a CPI inflator and figure out what is $40,000 in 1841? What is that in 2016 dollars? And the answer is is that Mike Byrne? I'm sorry. You look like someone from FEMA. No, it's a compliment. Sorry. If you do the CPI inflator and put it in 2016 dollars, it's literally hundreds of millions of dollars. The humble Jesuit University president is Father McGinley with Robert Moses. And the story goes like this, right? Moses and McGinley had a meeting. Moses was in the process of figuring out what to do with the convention center where the Time Warner Center is now. Father McGinley wanted just some floors, or at least in there, and he somehow convinced Moses over a period of meetings to give him the acreage that Dr. Cammarosano just described.
My name is Joe.
Joe, that land is extraordinarily valuable. Joe is right that Fordham has invested a significant amount of money, but what a real estate deal. And Father McGinley was the humble Jesuit university president in that case. Speaking of Robert Moses, and I have to tell you how I got into the honors program. There was a Pat Fox in the honors program in my college, at Fordham College, who belonged in the honors program. Envelopes were, no, this is a true story, and it took me 7 years to graduate from Rose Hill, so this is, I'm not kidding. So I get the envelope, I get invited to the honors program. Robert Moses, who was near the end of his life, and if you haven't read it, everybody's got to read The Power Broker, extraordinary book, and Fordham, features significantly in it, related to the Lincoln Center purchase. So Robert Moses is invited up, he's speaking to the honors program in Keating Hall. It's a beautiful day. I recall March, April, and May. Windows are open, and the FUV antennas on the top were nearby. Moses is elderly, stooped, but in total control of his faculties. He goes up to a microphone with a Fordham insignia on it, and right before he begins to speak, you hear FUV or some crackling, and it reports terrible traffic on the Cross Bronx Expressway. Absolutely true, which was, and Msgr. Shelley, in the next revised edition, you've got to include the story. It's absolutely true. And we were all just transfixed. You have this guy who built the Cross Bronx Expressway late in his career, it engendered the wrath of Jane Jacobs, and the pendulum shifted away from Moses to Jacobs. In my view, different subject. I think the pendulum shifted too far and needs to shift back, especially in a world that's short of infrastructure. But for about 60 seconds, I think it was an FUV reporter reporting on the traffic on the Cross Bronx Expressway. Just extraordinary. And then Moses launched into his speech. Moses was a real friend of the Catholic Church, a real friend of Fordham. One of the pictures in the book that's striking to me is the picture of President Roosevelt with Cardinal Spellman and the president of Fordham in an open-top car. And this was in the time of the powerhouse, right? The powerhouse being the phrase for the power that the Archbishop and the Cardinal of New York had. And obviously we live in totally different times. And the secular power that Spellman had is unlikely to be repeated in our lifetime. But to me, it's a very striking picture. The other thing is I got, to me, an unbelievable education here at Rose Hill. I spent 5 or 6 years at the law school before going to Skadden. It took me a long time to get out of there as well. I see Dean Riley in the back, and my friend and colleague Elaine Crossan, the general counsel of Fordham here. I just got an extraordinary education. To answer your question, Fordham, it seems to me there are two educational institutions in the city that have played a unique role. City College is one. Fordham is another, especially for Catholic students. I'm a first-generation American. I started here in '74, graduated, 6 years later would be 1980, I guess. And a first-generation American, first in my family, not only go to college, and first in the family to go to college is a typical Fordham college story, right? I was first in my family to go to high school. And I think that Fordham has, for a lot of students like that, been a acclimating people to the country, but also preparing many for careers in public service. I think it's a very unique role. I think that City College has played that same role for, in some ways, a different demographic. There was a period of time, actually, Joe Flom. Joe Flom went to City College, went into the Army, went to Harvard Law School, founded this the great firm, and that's one of Fordham's, I think, great legacies in terms of public service.
Josh, you want to add anything?
Well, like Patrick, I'm a first generation. And for me, as director of admission, being a first generation student, I was raised in a single parent household. We scraped together everything we could back in the 80s to get me to come to Fordham. For me, that's part of the sacred trust in the role that I have, and thinking about the central role of Fordham and our students, and and the students that we bring to our campuses and how important that is for us. If I could divert a moment, I was thinking about the two questions that Monsignor Shelley asked, and those are the questions I have to get up and ask myself every single day. How do we move forward in the world that we are living in and keep progressing, but stay true to our mission, and also share with everyone the concept of the importance of a Jesuit education and how, as Father McShane has always said, that's a transforming and empowering form of education. And I think that we can do that, and seeing so many students in the room here today is really exciting. One of the students who I personally recruited just left, so I'm sorry he's just not here. And some of the young alums who we've worked with over the years is great, but that's part of it. The students are the center of our mission. And thinking about how do we make sure that we convey to students locally who know New York City and may take it for granted, almost not think about that you can go to the Met at lunchtime while you're in the city or spend time in Central Park and are thinking, I need to go to some other world capital or some other place when so much is here. So how do we make sure that we tell students Fordham is incredible and it's here in an incredible city, and then introduce Fordham to a nation and a world that maybe has not visited yet, has not come here, has not experienced us. So thinking about New York is my campus, Fordham is my school is really important. But underlying all of that, it's the Jesuit nature of who we are which makes us different. It was what made it different for me. I reflected that I had 9 different Jesuits teach me in my undergraduate and graduate career. 9 different Jesuits. That's a privilege now.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And I hope that many of the students here today still have that experience. But it was the idea of taking knowledge from all these different classes that I would get in the core curriculum, and then seeing the interdisciplinary connections between them, and making those connections and critically think, and being able to form ideas no matter what the major was or what my friends' majors were, and then being able to trans that with eloquentia perfecta, we hope, and to then take the city as classroom, right? Just get out and do things in the city. See some paintings, go out, see them in the museums. Talk about questions of theology or about literature or about history while you're actually in places that it happens. So those are the things that we want students to experience. So I think that's where we kind of are in the intersection of the past and the future, is keeping all of those things about Fordham central.
And I just want to add, because you actually touched upon the next question I wanted to ask. But so, Fordham has aspirations to be, a national and globally recognized university, which is wonderful. But we still have to stay, true to our roots. So how do we make that happen? I figured for you, because you're the day-to-day, you're the face that the students see that say, please come to my school. Don't go to an NYU or I don't know, a Stanford or somewhere else.
Well, I'll tell a funny little anecdote, and those of you who have ever been in meetings with the admission team always scratch your heads, because we go around the room and everyone says, we'll tell you what territories we recruit in, because we're all responsible for different parts of the country. And somebody will say, I have Nebraska, North Dakota, Illinois, and the Bronx. And then someone else will say, I have Maryland, D.C., Virginia, Texas, and Queens. And invariably people scratch their heads and they're like, how did you come up with these combinations? And the truth of the matter is there's lots of different reasons that go into that, but the core of it is it's important that every member of the admission team works with students that have 2 varied experiences. That some students come from a very far away place and see Fordham differently than the students that are local, but that they are equal. And it's just as important to recruit our students that are in our backyard and get to know them and get to give them the opportunities to see Fordham as it is to attract these students nationwide. And it would be remiss of me not to mention some of the other offices that we work very closely with too, that work with a lot of the local students that we partner with, like our incredible HEOP program or our incredible C-STEP program, to work with Dorothy Day, who brings groups of students to campus. These are all partnerships that we value, so that we can keep that balance both with our local students while we're also trying to reach nationally, and of course, our counselors that are traveling abroad.
Okay, great. So let's get back to the Jesuit mission. In addition to being the 175th anniversary, because I can't say that word, the Dodransbicentennial, right? That's it, Father. Of our founder, by His Eminence Archbishop John Hughes. It's also the 170th anniversary of the Jesuits coming to Rose Hill 5 years later in 1846. And over the years, hundreds of Jesuits have served here and have put their stamp on a Fordham education. Obviously, what it has meant for Fordham to be a Jesuit university has shifted dramatically, right? Jesuits would care and educate the students that were here. Today, it means, it's much more complex. Given Fordham's diverse student body, you touched upon it, and Monsignor Shelley touched upon it. What would you say defines the Jesuit presence and mission at Fordham? And over the years, how has our placement as one of the world's most complicated and diverse urban settings shaped what it means for Fordham to be a Jesuit institution? Monsignor, you should start with that, since you're the Jesuit here.
I'm sorry.
You're not? I'm sorry. I apologize. Oh, my.
I say that not with pride or regret, just a statement of fact.
My faux pas.
But so many Jesuits present here, it's a bit presumptuous of me to define Jesuit education. But I think to go back to something that I mentioned, I think it's rooted in that Christian humanism that has characterized it for 4 centuries. And as far as I can see, that is at the heart of Jesuit education, and also this business of, cura personalis, taking a personal interest in the well-being of every student. Now, how you do that in an institution this large, I'd say it's a question to be discussed. I don't have any ready answers.
Joe?
May I add to that?
Absolutely. Please.
I want to point out a number of Jesuits that I've had in my lifetime, and I think that'll answer your question. I'm going to start with Father Harold Mulqueen. None of you know Father Harold Mulqueen, but he was the moderator of the band. And at the end of each academic year, he would have a dinner for these young people, and he'd invite others as well. And he never sat down at table to enjoy his dinner. Instead, he just circulated from table to table, asking whether or not they had been well served, and if they wanted additional food, go for seconds. That was a small thing, very small, but that's cura personalis. I never forgot that. Father George McMahon, the same. And I want to talk about some of the other Jesuits I've known. I think that they were tremendous role models. They were a tremendous role model for me, both as a student and as colleagues. I want to talk briefly about each of the ones who made an impression on my life, if I may.
Please, absolutely.
Father Jim Finley, who did not want to be president of Fordham University, notwithstanding the fact that the trustees would have nothing of it, and insist that he become the president. A man of complete dedication, a man of humility, modesty, and I admired him greatly for that. I served with him, and it was a privilege. Father Tim Healy. Father Tim Healy was executive vice president, whom I succeeded. And I admired him for his erudition. I wish that I could have been as smart as he was. His erudition. Talk about eloquentia perfecta. He had it all. He became president of Georgetown University and then subsequently was president of the Library of New York. I want to talk a little bit about Father O'Hare briefly. He always sought a peaceful way out of any problem. A superb writer who honed his skills, Father Schroth at America, and then, of course, a wonderful public speaker. Father Leo McLaughlin, the much maligned Leo McLaughlin. Let me talk a little about him, if I may. I want to cite 2 experiences to illustrate his sense of justice. When advised by the wife of a retiree that they were having a difficult time getting together, putting things together, he responded not by another letter, not by conducting a survey among other retirees. He simply took that as a fact. And without fanfare, without any follow-up, without any further interrogation, he decided to supplement each of the retirees' pensions, which were meager at that time, by money that came out of the current operating budget. There was no fund, Father, and he took it out of current operations. And again, as I said, he didn't wait, no follow-up, no questions, but like Nike, he just did it. And that was it. Another and this affected some of my colleagues. For many years, to become a tenured professor, you had to become an associate professor at Fordham. And for whatever reason, a good number of our faculty did not acquire that particular title. And so there were faculty members of 20 and 30 years without tenure. And when he came into office, he said, that's unjust, and issued an executive order, instant tenure for all of them. It was like getting a battlefield commission on the field of battle, Henry. An instant battlefield commission. There's a man who, he was much maligned, but he was a man of a good heart. He was kind, but he was fair and just. And I want to cite him. Father Vinnie O'Keefe, another one of my favorites. Unfortunately, only here a short time because he was called to Rome, and he was the second in command to Father Rupe, the Father General. And when Father General passed away, it was thought that Father O'Keefe would succeed him. But Pope John Paul II had other thoughts. Father O'Keefe was too liberal for him, okay? And so when Father O'Keefe came back to the States, a young man said, Father, were you disappointed that you did not succeed Father Rupe? He said, no, but my sister was. Another one-liner. This was before Pope John Paul sent him back to the States. Anybody from Jersey City? So you know the politics of Jersey City. Okay. Well, Father O'Keefe was a native of Jersey City. And at the time, Father Ciccianatelli, Victor Vanatelli. Anybody know Father Ciccianatelli? Okay, very good. Father Ciccianatelli. He was so popular in Jersey City, they wanted to make him mayor.
Ooh.
Rome had other thoughts. And Father O'Keefe was the intermediary. And of course, to lighten the blow, he said, Chick, and of course, I should tell you that Father O'Keefe knew all of the source of graft in Jersey City. This is going back to the Hague administration, okay?
Where is he now?
And so I said, Chick, listen, it's going to cost you. If you think that I'm going to support you, I'm going to have to become your sanitation commissioner. That was Father O'Keefe. Oh, I'm going to leave oh, yes, one of my favorites, so Father Mike Walsh, Father Michael P. Walsh, who served as president of Boston College and later, of course, as president of Fordham University. And I was privileged to work for him. And what impressed me most, he was a great guy, but his political skills. Father Mike was born and raised in an Irish neighborhood in South Boston. And he could answer a question by not giving an answer. Nazi moron, but he was good at that. And when I joined him, I was advised that only winning the war was important. That was all that mattered. Forget the skirmishes. And Joe, forget the ground balls. Don't try to stop every ground ball. That was no problem for me. I said, Father, I'm a lousy infielder anyway. I see there are no baseball fans here. We got to bring them out. Bring them out to City Field, I'll bring them out to the stadium. Give them an education here. All right. Your Jesuit product for not knowing baseball?
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Well, they better show up on November 12th for the football game at least.
That's true. That's true.
Well, anyway, I had run into trouble with one of the trustees. He accused me of being too harsh, that I was holding expenses down too hardly, and it wasn't right. And so we had a very difficult exchange between the two. And we didn't come to fisticuffs, but it was an elevated discussion. Father Mike was present, and he saw what went on, and said, Joe, for the next board of trustees meeting, I'm not going to have you give the budget report. And said, I hope you don't feel offended. Father, to the contrary. I said, if I were a baseball manager, I would have benched myself. Father Mike.
Right. That's great.
He knew when to hold them and when to fold them.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Quite a guy. And then I'm going to end up with one of my favorite Jesuits, Father Harry Sievers. Some of you probably were in graduate school at that time. What a cheerful soul. What a guy. And of course, Father Ed Clark was another one of my favorite guys. These were guys. I mean, forget any other quadrant, but Father Stephen was special. Great sports fan. And before any big race, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, we would get together and we would handicap the horses.
Oh, I love it.
My kind of
Yes,
guy.
sir. I said you have to know sports to come to
That's
Fordham.
true. That's true.
And you ever hear Arthur Daly, any of you guys? Yeah. John Kiernan? Yeah. At a time when Fordham didn't have that kind of relationship with the New York Times, these guys were editors of the New York Times. But anyway, let me get back to the story here. Which was what? Remind me.
So we were talking about with Jesuits, right?
Let me finish.
Yes, go ahead.
Father Stevens. So we would handicap the horses.
Yep.
But all we did was make mind bets. You know what a mind bet is? Only in your head, you didn't actually put the $2 on the horse. Why? He had no money. And I had even less money than he had. But that was another wonderful relationship. And also I had a great relationship with a couple of Army chaplains. Father Arthur North, Dean of the Graduate School also, and Father John Morrison. And I could relate to those guys because we both spoke the same language. But I would say this, that those guys were role models. And you can talk all you want about your mission. That's very important. But who they were and what they represented really spoke volumes as far as I was concerned. I'm indebted to them immensely. I can't forget
you.
them.
I'd like
And yeah, no. So I want to ask the other panelists who their role models were, or somebody who didn't we remember here tonight. But people ask me why I became an economics major. I started here in 1982. I was a bold freshman. I took one of Joe's classes, and I fell in love with him. So I ended up becoming an economics major. Went into politics afterwards, but I was an economics major. So in my life, Joe has been an incredible role model. So thank you, Joe. But Patricia, I don't know if you want to add, or Pat.
When I got here for orientation on August, I think 28th or August 30th, 1986, it was the first time that I had been away from home, like permanently. And I remember standing out on Eddie's Parade, and I'm sure some of the students in the room remember this. It was dark. The sun had gone down, and everybody had already paired up with all of their friends. And believe it or not, I used to be very shy and retiring and quiet. And I didn't have anyone to pair up with yet. My roommates had all moved along, and there I was. And I stood there and I said, I have made the biggest mistake ever. How am I going to do this? And before I could even finish the thought, Father Stephen Babos walked over.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Pablos.
And he came over and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just hanging around. He's like, let me bring you over to meet some friends. And he takes me over to this group of people. And clearly the rest is history because I've only been absent from here for 6 years. But when I meet with students, I like to tell that story because if it wasn't for that kind of turning point, that care for just that one student who wasn't connected, I'm not sure, what the next 4 years would be like. And when I talk about the 9 Jesuits, I sadly say that 7 of them are no longer with us. So what does that mean for the future? It means that there were so many other memorable faculty members who were not Jesuit, but
yes.
Jesuit in the sense of everything that they do to care for students in the same way. And students and faculty members that I see here today that do that go find those students. That we had a student panel the other day, and a student said, my faculty member will spend a half an hour with me in office hours. A half an hour in office hours. And I just don't think you find that in other places.
And I'd mentioned Father Pascal, Father Varga, Nori Clark,
Oh, yes.
Brother Leonard Gilhooly, by indirection, find direction out. I still remember it and cite it often. Use it against people. The philosophy, George Gill, not a Jesuit, but extraordinary teacher, an incredibly humble man, a great scholar. And one of the things, I was also a high school and college debater. Debate was a big part of my experience. Obviously, an important activity for Jesuits, had a big role in, for better or worse, making me the type of professional I am. But I think the quality of education, small classes, personal attention, and having world-class scholars in a room of 15, 20, 25 people, economics, philosophy, theology, it was just an extraordinary education, and then kind of debate on top of that. the Jesuit education is obviously about service as well, and looking out to the larger world, and of course humility.
Absolutely.
Let me just put in a wee word for the lay faculty. I didn't go to Fordham College, but I did an MA here at Fordham many years ago. And most of the professors were lay teachers, and one in particular I was very much impressed with, taught medieval history, Jeremiah Sullivan.
Oh, yes.
And one of the things I always remember, he got his doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania, but he did his work in the Public Record Office in England before World War II. That's how far back he goes. And I remember him saying at that time, you would hire young women by the hour to copy the material you wanted. I thought in one lifetime we went from that to Xerox and copying machines. So what a difference that made.
Yeah. Right, thank you. All right, so since we're making it light, your favorite Fordham story?
Well, the Moses story I told is one. My other favorite story is St. Patrick's Day, senior year, 1978. My debate partner, Joe Hanser, and I were in the cafeteria, and on St. Patrick's Day, it started snowing. And we had classes, and we got in my car and drove to Florida. And left a note for Joe's mother in Yonkers and my mother in Jackson Heights. I think college debate. A lot of my friends are close friends are high school and college debate partners. Debate was an important part of my life. The Fordham College still has. Actually, I ought to say I met my wife, who didn't have the privilege of going to Lincoln Rose Hill, but did go to Lincoln Center. I met her when she was a college debater. I was coaching when I was first year of law school. 2 of our 3 daughters have gone to Fordham. The other's a defector. She's at Fairfield in Connecticut. So debate was an important part of the experience for me.
I have many Fordham stories, and they develop every day. But I guess the most recent thing for me is, so we just had my 25th reunion, and so now my peers who I graduated with, their children are going through the college process. So my favorite part of any event is when I see someone 25 years later with their children and I'm working with them. So I have many of those, and those are evolving now quite rapidly. So that's exciting parts for me to see the tradition continue.
I like a story that Father O'Hare tells about the last time he walked in the St. Patrick's Day parade. He said an elderly gentleman came up to him. He said he really made me feel so good. Yeah. He came up and he said, "Thank you so much for all you've done for Fordham." Father McGinley.
Oh, okay. So one of our last questions. So there is, talk about diversity and respect. There's a remarkable quote from Archbishop Hughes that I want to read to everyone. Everyone knows the Archbishop, came from very humble beginnings. He came from Ireland, and at a time when, they didn't like Irish immigrants here in the States. The Archbishop's quote is significant, I think, not only because it's so unusual for someone of his time to say what he said, it's also significant because it provides, even today, a sort of benchmark for how we might evaluate Fordham. So I'm going to read the quote. "I have always preached that every denomination, Jews, Christians, Catholics, Protestants, of every shade and sex, were all entitled to entire freedom of conscience, without hindrance from any sect or number of sects, no matter how small their number or how unpopular the doctrine that they profess." Over its history, how well did Fordham live up to the Archbishop's vision? And what are ways in which we can still be challenged by what the Archbishop said today?
I'll answer that.
Okay.
Consider the beginning of Fordham. You pointed out that a large part of our student population came from the South. And many of the young men were not of our persuasion religiously. They were Protestants. And I would have thought, the Jesuits would do a little proselytizing. No way, no how. Only 5%, according to Father Shelley's wonderful book, less than 5% became Catholics. No proselytizing, okay? I want to go back to our School of Medicine. School of Medicine back in the 20s. That enrollment, the student enrollment was largely of the Jewish faith. No holds barred, okay? Even more importantly, the School of Pharmacy, which was phased out in my time in administration. It was administered by a Jewish gentleman by the name of Jacob Wiener. He was a dean. And 75% of the student population was of the Jewish faith. No questions asked at all. The School of Education, it was pointed out, provided advanced degrees for the public school teachers who were looking for tenure or promotion. Again, largely of Jewish faith. Again, no questions asked. Our law school, same thing. And so therefore, Fordham was true, for many other reasons, to the Archbishop's concern. No question about it. And Fordham has remained that way right to the present time. We have never turned any, and look at the law, I should have mentioned law school. The law school, too, has a very substantial population of non-Catholic believers. And as a matter of fact, I think, as you pointed out, one of the provincials asked, why? We're supposed to be training Catholic youngsters instead of all of these Jewish kids. And yet he was reprimanded for making that statement. That gives you an idea of the quality and character of the Society of Jesus, right?
If I could just pick up on what you mentioned about this pharmacy school, Jacob Diener. He was the dean for 20 years, the first Jewish dean at Fordham. And when the Jesuit general discovered he was Jewish, he wanted him fired. Yeah. For no reason, apparently, except that he was Jewish. And the president of Fordham, the provincial, and especially Joe Keating went to bat for him. And Keating wrote a marvelous letter to the general saying it would be an awful act of injustice and would cause all kinds of wonderment that Fordham would fire a person simply because he was Jewish. And Diener stayed for 20 years. So I'd say that was a great, and this is back, before the First World War.
That's right.
So it's, and for somebody like Joe Keating, who was just an ordinary Jesuit professor, to do that, I think, showed great courage, and he won.
I think a place like Fordham that values teaching theology and trying to have students understand how theology operates in the world in relation to other majors. When we talk with students about the students, we'll always say, so what's the requirements in the core? And we go down them and they want to understand why they have to take certain courses. And when we get to that, we're talking about faith and reason. And we'll steal something from Father Grimes. I want to be, in case he's listening. Faith without reason, reason without faith, that concept, this idea of having that dialectic between the two is important. So it sets up a classroom and a community where it's okay to talk about faith. So students of no faith, exploring one's faith, students very firm in their faith, it's a place that you can come and have those dialogues. And so we want to make sure that students understand that. And I think that's a real valuable part of Jesuit education, that it's a place where you can welcome all those conversations and not shy away from them.
So I have three thoughts. One is, and this may be something Monsignor Shelley or someone in the history department will look at. I'm skeptical that Archbishop used those words, that an archbishop in 1840 made a public statement with the word sex in it.
Right.
I thought about that when I was reading it.
It doesn't ring true to me, but that's an assignment for the history department. I just think it unusual. One. Two, I think the statement, the Archbishop John Dagger uses statement, I think is aspirational. I think it's been Fordham's goal a long time. The other thing, just to fill out the historical picture on Archbishop Hughes, it's important to note that he was Archbishop at a time where Irish immigrants and Catholics were in disfavor in the Know Nothing movement, et cetera, right? And there was a threat, I believe, at some point around the time Fordham was created to burn down the old St. Patrick's Cathedral on Mulberry Street, Father? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, Mulberry Street. And I think the Archbishop's response was that if anybody lit a candle in St. Patrick's Cathedral to try to burn it down, he'd have the city burned down. This is a strong, Father, I have that right? Yeah. He was a strong advocate for his flock, but I think the underlying statement is reflective of the goals and the aspirations of Fordham, which I think it's lived up to. I'm not going to take your advice and try to we'll just call it the anniversary.
But I think it's important, since you said the word sex, to say gender, that, what's interesting is, another reflection that I had was Fordham College at Rose Hill didn't enroll women until 1974, which would make me the 12th entering class of women. One day I woke up and thought of that, and I thought, how could I only be 12?
Yeah, and I entered 4 years before you did.
8.
Yeah, but now,
Thomas More College, that was.
Patty, but now you outnumber the males.
Right.
Exactly.
And
So you made your point.
right. Well, one more slight one. Hello, women in the room. The concept of an admission director is also not that old. That's like only a second half of the century thing. So there have been 8 of us. I'm number 8, but I'm only the second woman. So that's really exciting. So.
See that? Okay. With that, I think we're going to take some questions from the audience. 2. We're going to take 2 questions, Jim tells me. So if you
Make them good ones.
if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Please state the question, who you'd like the question to be answered by, and we'll try to accommodate. Yes.
What do you guys have to say to the freshmen sitting in the audience?
Can you stand up?
Yes, sorry, my name is Mario. I'm a freshman here, and there's a lot of us, and so I want to ask, what do you guys have to say to us sitting freshmen?
You're lucky. You're very lucky. No, seriously. I always say this now. I tell Father McShane, I don't know if I would have gotten in the university now, based on my grades and my SATs and everything, but I'm sure he would have found a way to get me here. But you are in an incredible university. You are in an incredible place. You should savor every moment. You should soak it all in, because before you know it, you'll be out in the real world, and you'll see, looking back, you'll see all the great things that Fordham taught you, and you'll see the many different webs and connections that Fordham will leave you with.
I agree with all that. I'd add, you're in New York City. And there are lots of people in Kansas and Nevada and Bangalore and Frankfurt, Germany, who want to be in New York. Everybody wants to be in New York, because if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I think it's I think so. So that'd be one. 2 is you want to get as much as you can out of your education at the college, as much as you can out of New York City, but also relationships with your classmates, right? Some of your classmates are going to turn out to be a general in the Army, a gazillionaire, the governor of the state. Actually, someone I went to college with, who I didn't really know, was Mario Cuomo's son. He was the governor or the lieutenant governor then, and I work for him and Governor Christie now, 2 governors, twice the fun. And your classmates, some of them are going to be, you and your classmates are going to do extraordinary things, and getting a Fordham education in New York City in 2016, you were extraordinarily lucky.
I think we met at orientation, right? Good to see you again. I know his roommate. That's good to see you again. And I echo it. You take advantage of everything. Everything that we said in admission, you take advantage of. All of these things. And if there's something that you can't find, you hold me to Downs and you ask me where it is.
Yeah. Sorry, one other thing I'll say. You got to talk to the guidance people, but Fordham Law School and Fordham College and Lincoln Center, it's the type of alumni network. If you call someone and say, I'm a freshman or I'm a sophomore at Fordham, I'd like to sit down and spend half an hour with you or figure out what you do, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a great reception. It's not necessarily going to lead to a job, and you shouldn't make the call expecting a job. But Fordham alums are generous with their time. They want to help. They want to help freshmen, and I'd encourage you to do that. It's just, takes a little, just open the door and make the call.
Yeah. Let's look at the record. I knew this question was going to come up, so I did a little homework. The top of the list: Cardinals, Spellman, McCarrick, and Dulles. Vince Lombardi. We talked about the governorship. Governor Malcolm Wilson. Bob Keeshan. You know who he was? Yeah, Captain Kangaroo. One of my favorites, Frankie Frisch.
Fordham
Who is Frankie Frisch? The Fordham Flash. Played with the Cardinals. And of course, the lady became a broadcaster. What do you complain always about? The bases on balls. But Frankie Frisch. Vin Scully.
Scully. 'Geraldine Ferraro. Mary Higgins Clark.
Geraldine Ferraro. Mary Higgins Clark. 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 Mary Higgins William Walsh, who helped fund this place right here, the library, all right? Ann Anastasio became president of the American Psychological Association. Mario Gabelli, Joe McLaughlin, Bill Mulligan, appellate judges in the Second Circuit. John Kieran and Arthur Daly, who became sports editors of the New York Times at a time when we were persona non grata. You know that, Father McShane? I do. You do. And then I want to cite the Troika. These were the people behind Governor Rockefeller, the Troika. Louis Lefkowitz, Malcolm Wilson, was then lieutenant governor, and Joseph Carlino. Joe Carlino from the island, from Long Beach. This was the backup to Governor, and Governor Rockefeller acknowledged this fact. So that gives you some, and then I want to add a couple of students from our own department, Henry. Anthony Santomero, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Ed O'Connell.
That would have been great.
Vice President of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank. And then finally, these are not just my students, I shared them with Henry and the other members of the department. And then finally, Jerry Corrigan, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So I'll give you some idea, guys, as to what you can look forward to. You can do it. Just follow these guys' example.
If I could just add a word to that. First of all, let me say welcome. But also, let me repeat something that Joe McLaughlin, Dean McLaughlin, said at a commencement address. He said to the students, now you've spent 4 years, hard work, you've earned these degrees, you have all of this knowledge you've acquired in the classroom, but he said, remember, you also need common sense. He said, don't be like my Uncle Tom, who came here from Ireland, got to Ellis Island, and the immigration officer asked him the standard question and said, do you advocate overthrow the government by force or violence? He said, Uncle Tom thought he had to choose one or the other. He said, violence.
That's it.
Any other questions? No more? Oh, I'm sorry. Just one?
Father, I have to let you ask your question.
Yes.
Please do.
I just want to add something. I graduated in 55 and worked for the RAND and now work for American. And then I taught here for 10 years, and assistant dean for a few years. Now, I'd say what Fordham gave to me and to people I associated with, above all, was friendship. Faculty truly loved their students, and they were not hesitant to socialize with them. As a result, we loved one another, both as buddies and as equals and people who are teachers. So I think the best thing that you can say about Fordham, and I've taught 5 Jesuit universities, but Fordham teaches you to love.
That's great. Wonderful way to end this afternoon. Before I ask Father McShane to come up, just 2 housekeeping rules, issues. Don't forget to take the book. Only take 1 copy. And maybe the Monsignor could autograph. I actually brought my copy so you can autograph my copy. And would also like to thank Jim and Patricia Bellucci, the program manager of the Center for Religion and Culture, for helping pull this whole thing together. After we conclude, there'll be a little reception in the auditorium, and it's now my pleasure to invite Father McShane. And Father, you know how much I love you, and I actually want to thank you, because last year when my New York Mets, I was born and raised in the Bronx, but we lived closer to Shea than we did to Yankee, so we became Met fans. But when the Mets were in the World Series, Father McShane sent me a lovely bottle of champagne and wished me luck. So with that, I know he roots for the other team in the Bronx, but we're both doing well. We both want to become playoff contenders, and I think we're on a good path for that. But I just wanted to give you on behalf of... I know.
Just
a
wear
little
backwards,
token.
Father.
I want to be 20 years old again. Hold on to that for a second, all right? At the outset, Joe McLaughlin. Joe McLaughlin was a great teacher, and he was a great dean of the law school. He was also one of the greatest after-dinner speakers in the city, or the whole region. Second only to his predecessor in the dean's office, William Hughes Mulligan, who claimed that he was, a relative of Archbishop Hughes. One of his children said, in introducing himself, "I'm a direct descendant of Archbishop Hughes." And I said, well, I certainly hope not. But everyone wants a part or a piece of Dagger John, you see. But Joe McLaughlin was in class, and one of his students, posed a question, which he found to be an unworthy question. And, he posed it, and Joe looked and went back to teaching. And the student said to him, "Wait a minute, aren't you going to answer my question?" To which Joe said, memorably and wonderfully, "Mr. Tolan, I refuse to engage in a war of wits with an unarmed man." Which, I mean, imagine having the presence of mind to come out with that. I'm going to do three things now, if I could. First, on your behalf, I want to thank our panelists and our moderator for what they did. And I'll say a word or two about each one of them, if I could. Haeda, I want to thank you for a great job being the moderator today. I also want to thank you for wearing a maroon dress. This was really a terrific touch. It didn't go unnoticed by me. Haeda is, she's simply an extraordinary person. She is one of the very few people that were in the inner circle of Mayor Bloomberg's administrative team. She was one of the people on whom he depended daily, and to whom he could entrust the most difficult diplomatic missions. And there are diplomatic missions within the 5 boroughs. And she did everything well. And I remember, and she's not going to like my saying this, I remember being with her on the last day of the Bloomberg administration's tenure. We were together at the mayor's prayer breakfast, which was held in the New York Public Library. And it was quite an event. It was one of the only times I've ever seen him choke up. And here's the mayor, who is very, very strong, data-driven businessman, really getting emotional. Never got emotional in public at all. And it was very moving. And I turned to look at Haeda, and she was crying because he was a great man. He's a great man.
Yeah.
And I think we share a great admiration and affection. But she's now, I forgive her, she's gone over to the dark side. But, just remember, you were educated in the Bronx, and we're a missionary operation here, and we're going to pray for your conversion. Pat Foye, you didn't get enough of Pat Foye's background. He kind of slipped things in. First generation. First in his family to go to high school, first in his family to go to college. Then Skadden. Do you know what Skadden was when he was hired? It was an extraordinary firm. It was one of the greatest firms in the city, and it was bold and it was honorable. Hardworking, bold, and honorable. And he was recruited. And then, he's gone on from there to positions of great trust. He just in a throwaway said, his classmate, Andrew Cuomo, is the governor of New York, and he works for him and the governor of New Jersey. Everyone kind of tittered, but that's about the most difficult job in the United States. He's got to deal with 2 different parties, 2 different states, 2 different personalities, and I have to say, because he won't say it about himself, Pat Foye, we are blessed to have as the executive director of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. He is most honorable. Pat Foye is the hardest working, most honorable, honest guy, and most self-effacing guy ever to have as much power as he does. It's no wonder, you know, that in all that we've been through in the metropolitan area, you know, with the scandals associated with, this is the man who stands tall and who cannot be replaced. So it's an honor to have you as a friend, and we're proud to call you a graduate. Patty Peek. Patty Peek is, I met one, I said, she's the best. She is somebody who's unflappable. She tells the Fordham story with style, with persuasive power, and you know, it's no wonder to me our numbers keep rising, you know, in application activity, because Patty speaks from the heart. Everyone trusts her. Families trust her, students trust her, parents. You know, they will go to her. They'll listen to a talk I give, and they go to her, and with good reason. She's trustworthy. She loves Fordham. She lives in Fordham, bleeds maroon, but sadly didn't wear maroon today. I'm very disappointed. The ram. She wore the ram, but you know, she wanted to look New York professional, or black, like Msgr and I did. I'm going to go to Joe Cammarosano.
Monsignor.
Not yet. There's too much there. Joe Cammarosano is everything that Monsignor Shelley said he was. He only missed the first 100 years on campus. But, you know, he saw, 18 years of that 100 unfolding from a distance, fell in love with the place, came here, and we owe, I think, the presidents before me were right. Jim Finley, who's one of my greatest heroes, would say, he said the truth. We owe more to Joe than just about anybody else, except for one other Joe, and I think you'd agree with me, and I think Tom would say the same. The two Joes that we owe a lot to, and even the survival of the institution to, are Joe Keating, who was treasurer of the place through the Great Recession. Great Depression, the recession, the Great Depression. And in the depths of the Great Depression, he built our signature building because he hid the football money from the president. And he was the guardian of the soul. The guardian of the soul. And the other is Joe C., as everyone knows him, correct? Joe C., Joe Cammarosano, jack of all trades and master of all of them. The man who was the executive vice president through our most difficult period, aside from the Great Depression. The man who was a great link and bridge between faculty and administration, between Jesuit and lay. He was also the man who brought Edwards Parade back. When he arrived in the office of the executive vice president, it was a dust bowl. And there's a great picture of Joe on the tractor in the book, returning Edwards Parade to its glory. There was nothing he wouldn't do, nothing he didn't do. So Joe C. he's simply an amazing part of who we are. And he's one of the two Joes to whom we owe our existence. I also have great regard for my predecessor, Father O'Hare, who's the third Joe, and great man. Monsignor Shelley, I have to tell you, I've known Tom literally all my life because he's my cousin. And my mother was his godmother. And he is a classmate of John Fearix. I grew up in a household where Tom was spoken of in hushed tones because he was the brightest in the family and the most, had the greatest sense of humor. And he was my mother's favorite. And nothing could be said except, in praise, and rightly so. He's a great guy. He's a masterful historian, great raconteur, a wonderful sense of humor, and the history that he wrote, I'm happy to tell you, is a true history, warts and all. He does not hide anything in the book. And I think that's a great thing. The book ends on June 30th, 2003. Because I took over on July 1st, 2003, And when I asked him to do the book, I said to him, you have to end there. And he said, why? And I said, because you can't write about me. We're cousins. And so he did not, and I'm grateful for that. When I was entering into the agreement about the writing the book, the contract, I said to him, now, we'll pay you. And he said, absolutely not. He refused to accept any payment. He spent 6 years writing it with no payment at all. He did it really as, I think, a labor of love for a place that he loved, partly because, it was where he worked, partly because it was where he had many students, I think partly because it was such an important part of the New York scene and the history of New York. So this is an exceptionally good panel. And you heard the Fordham story told with affection, with great wit. And you got some stories that you'll never forget. And so I think this was a great kickoff for the Dodransbicentennial, which is a word I love. A word that you'll all know how to pronounce and that you'll love by the end of the year. And you'll have a hard time letting it go. Last thing, I always say about Fordham, other schools talk about their history. And they're proud of their history. I truly believe, Fordham is a place that has a history that it's not past. We live our history every day. The mission, that Pat talked about, that Joe talked about, that Tom talked about, Haeda and Patty as well. We live that. We're still a school, that has a great commitment to and a soft spot in its heart for first-generation college students. And right now, we could choose not to do that. But then we wouldn't be Fordham. So during this year of celebration, it's also a year when we can recommit ourselves to the unique mission of Fordham, the Jesuit University of the capital of the world, the Jesuit University of New York. We're rooted in New York, we serve New York, may it ever be so. So now on your behalf, I want to give gifts to our panelists. And each one of you is going to get an autographed history from Msgr. Shelley. But that, I'm giving it to you. He's not giving it to you. He's just autographed. And you're also going to get a Wedgwood Fordham plate.
Oh, thank you.
Limited edition. And they're quite lovely. And you're also going to get a plate stand. And I'd like to tell you, they are re-giftable. But if I find out that you have re-gifted, as Dorothy would say, you're dead to me. So, ladies and gentlemen, our first Dodrans panel. You get this one to hold, and I get the...